looking at mental health and spirituality. And as you notice, it doesn't say religion and spirituality, but spirituality. And it's not about my religion or my denomination or my tribe or my brand or my church. But I think it's a transcendent spirituality that connects us all to keep in mind. Now, some people, when they hear about spirituality, they're a little reticent about that, especially church people. They think, because you probably have heard some people say, well, I'm not really a religious person, but I'm a spiritual person, or I'm really not into organized religion, but I'm a spiritual person. However, I think a theme to keep in mind through this whole series is as we address challenging issues. Now, how we deal with those, I'm not totally sure in light of what everybody else has been carrying, but our political relationships, how to have courageous conversations with people, you may have already covered that one, and how we can get out of the pit that we're in. But primarily, to keep in mind, we're all beloved children of God. We know that. We know that as I was listening to you talk about how the church is going to divide, and how people divide, and people are red and blue, and you name all the things that people do, and pit ourselves in one camp or another. But hopefully, that something that transcends all of that is that we are all children of God. We are siblings. We may not always get along together and get along with each other and agree with each other, but we're still connected. Now, some of you may have seen that a preacher at a large downtown church had a highly publicized sermon last month. Why God sends good people to hell. Did y'all see that advertised? Why God sends good people to hell. It was on their marquee, and it was on Facebook, and it was advertised really, really well. I looked up the scripture that was referenced for that, Mark 10:1-48. I could not find any word in that scripture that even hinted at that. Instead, it's a passage that refers to the inclusive nature of God's love. So if we really feel and believe that we're beloved, it helps our mental health. I've never heard a person in my office say, I think I don't have good mental health because I'm loved too much. No, I think just to know that we're loved, whether that's by God or by other people, it helps our mental health and our well-being. Rabbis have counted that there's 613 commandments. You probably read that. I've never counted them, but I'll take their word for it. And those were the commandments that were in the Jesus Torah that he read, our Old Testament or Hebrew scripture. And as you and I know these things so well, that I'll just remind you, when Jesus said that of all the law and the prophets, the most important is that we love God with all of our heart and mind and soul, and we love others as we love ourselves. I know this is redundant, maybe to you, but I hope it never really becomes redundant and that we ever dismiss it, because I think that's probably the most important thing for us to be about. And that's true for our theme as well. So thanks be to God. Dee Dee, you told me that this group likes stories. Is that right? I see your head nod. So you like stories. So I'm going to share with you some stories. Now, this is a personal childhood story to illustrate this. And in telling this story, I'm not intending to insult your theological intelligence, but it is a simple story. And keep in mind that as a therapist, I'm always curious about people's childhood. I don't spend a lot of time there, but as you and I think about our childhood, we have probably some interesting memories. And you can remember things that were interesting for you, that were scary for you, that were wonderful for you, that may have been horrible for you. I don't know. So we have some, I bet every one of us has some very interesting memories about our childhood. Many of us would say it's probably miraculous that we lived through it, and maybe that our parents lived through it. And I'm glad that we're here today. As a child, I had this amazing imagination. Now I'm going to tell you one fact that you'll just get me pegged. I'm an only child. Some of you think, oh, that's the reason he's so messed up. Isn't it interesting how we could pick a particular variable and say, oh, that's the reason that person is the way they are. I don't know about you, but I think most of us are a little bit more complex than that. And as a 4 or 5 year only child, I did not know the so-called facts of life. Like those are the facts of life. I know they're important, but you and I know that's not the only facts of life. I was also blessed to live in a small rural community, about 120 miles from here. It was approximately, as they would say, as the crow flied, about 20 miles northwest of Paris in Lamar County. Somebody said, oh, that's the reason he's the way he is. I do wear boots, by the way, for whatever that's worth. Now, it's about 1.5 miles from Red River. It was originally called Round Prairie, and it's an area where my great-granddad and 4 of his brothers settled not long after the Civil War. And it's a nice place to grow up. Still have a lot of cousins there. And the pastors of our little Methodist on a 4-point charge were seminary students from Perkins. Now, I didn't know the term back in those days, but they preached good theology. Like most of us as little kids, we're pretty little in our thinking. Remember when you would hear people say, God knows the number of hairs on your head. Can you remember that? You know, we still hear that, kind of laugh about it now, but as little kids, that was little. How does God count all the hairs on our heads? We had more then, probably most of us, than we do now. That God can see us, knows us, know what goes on inside of us, is with us. I was a curious kid, were you? I hope you were curious as a kid. I hope you're still curious. I still am curious. You may be curious about me, what we're going to be doing today. As a little kid, I'd figured out most all of my body parts. This is PG, so don't worry. But I couldn't figure out the purpose of my navel. Yeah, I'm a little kid. I did not know about umbilical cords. I didn't know these things. What is the purpose? I knew it was really great for collecting dirt. You know, I played out in my sand bed a lot, in the plowed fields. I collected dirt really, really well. And when I would lie down on my back in the bathtub, by the way, it was a galvanized bathtub. So you've read about those. It made a nice little pool of water. I had a mystery of the navel. It was mysterious to me. One day, as I was out in our front yard playing, I remember looking up at the sky, like looking up to the heavens, and I had a vision. I imaged this clear, flexible tube that went from heaven, from God, to my navel. I thought, this is it. That's what this is. This is how God is connected to me and how I'm connected to God. This really answered my anatomy question, and it answered my theological questions. I just thought this was great. This is, as Genesis scripture might say, this is good. This is very good. I had that satisfied feeling that a little kid might have when they figured something out. This is really good. Then I thought, my mom and my dad, I called them mother and daddy, had navels. And then I imagined that everybody all over the world, for some reason, I think that little kids in Africa have navels. Everybody all over the world has a navel. I thought, I would imagine that everybody who's ever lived has had a navel. All connected to God. God is connected to all of us, and therefore we're all connected to each other. I know all of you have a navel. That is something we all have in common. And you may look at your navel differently now. So some of you may have had an experience like I did, but we're all connected. So let's carry this theme through today and through this whole series, and maybe beyond that as well. I don't know what all you have been about as you look at the topic, but when you and I talked about this last year, the topic for today was post-pandemic reality. Right? Isn't that interesting? That back then, and you and I remember when it was that little virus that was over in another part, or then eventually other parts of the world. Don't you remember with me when we were told that it really wasn't over to get to our country? It was never going to get on their shores, right? Remember that? Oh, it was not going to affect the United States of America. It would not be here. It was not going to affect us. We remember that. And then we were told, remember we were told that the churches were going to be filled on Easter Sunday? Remember that? What a history. What we've been, you and I know it is not post. It is a pandemic reality. And so that's the reason we're meeting by Zoom today, not just because of the weather, but because of COVID. I think the pandemic has permeated and affected all of our lives. Everybody's life has been affected one way or another in a multitude of different ways. And because of that, in that first year of the pandemic, I had over 30 Zoom seminars about pandemic stress, pandemic anxiety, pandemic depression, with church groups and men's groups and women's groups and parents groups and congregations and Stephen ministry groups, etc. Had a nationwide seminar with you. Last year, I spoke at the Owen lecture series that Lover's Lane has. Their title for me was Emotional Strain of the Pandemic. A few weeks ago, I was the keynote speaker at the North Texas Conference Clergy Retreat. It was about soul sanity. It's a program I developed called Soul Sanity that helps us to be sane in the various ways that we need to be to help ministers through these troubled times. And those of you of the church and those of you who are ministers, my gracious, you know what it's been like for churches and ministers as you and all of us have had to do all the things we've had to do and be as creative as we are to make this happen. Last month, the Perkins School of Youth Ministry, I've taught in that 35 years of its existence when youth ministers from all over the country come in for a week of training. And the title this year was Ministering in the Age of Anxiety. Now, adolescence, as you know, is an age of anxiety, right? Or you could say any age is, and then the age we're living is anxious. And then last week I had a Zoom seminar with the ministers of the Metro District. It was about mental health. And then next week I'm doing another one about mental wholeness for the different churches, a whole different. So, the pandemic has affected us and still affects us. To use the term of the title here, it is pandemic reality. I know some deny or in denial, but you and I know it is very, very real. I'm curious about what the pandemic has been like for you. Just maybe a minute, I'd like for some of you to unmute. I would be curious about one or two words that come about that. I'm not asking for a paragraph. We don't have time for it, but I'd be curious, just as you think about the pandemic, if you would unmute one at a time and say one word or one or two words and say, what's it been like for you? Would one of you do that? Two of you do that? No wrong answers. Joe.
Unending.
Unending. Forever and ever, and maybe not right. Yes.
Interruption.
Unending. Interruption. Good. Keep going.
Isolating.
Challenging.
Challenging.
Isolating.
Isolating. Yes. Good.
Limiting.
Limiting. Crippling.
Retreat.
Yes. Keep going.
Learning new technologies.
Yes. Yes.
Disappointing.
Yes. Thank you, Bart.
I can't put this into one word, but how about eliciting my protective instincts?
Protective instincts. You know, we kind of go back to primitive things that we go by instinct, what we have to do to survive. Many times we focus on what we need to do to survive, and then how we function, whether that's in business, whether that's in family, whether it's in church, all areas of our lives, it affects us. And when we have more time in some of these groups, I'll have in fact, at the retreat, I had a list of probably 20 or 30 feeling words that I'd heard ministers say, since I meet with about 20 or 30 or 40 ministers in therapy, most of whom are Methodist, but all the feeling words. You can think of the feeling words that you have had. And then the thoughts that we have, like you're describing, that of how it has changed. It's been life-changing, and it's ongoing, and it's ongoing, and it's ongoing. ongoing. So one of the ways to look at this in a way that hopefully is helpful is to put this in the context of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I've come up with a little term that I'm calling ongoing traumatic stress disorder because of that. And most of you are familiar with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And that really had its origins in the Vietnam War, as some of you might remember. Before that, you'll remember terms like shell shock, right? World War II, battle fatigue, combat fatigue, whatever. But it's the experience that people have when they have experienced trauma. As a therapist, I often people are experiencing traumatic experiences in their lives of one sort or another. And I'll just carry the military theme through for our purposes for right now. And you and I know, and some of you may have experienced PTSD if you've ever been in war. But I'll tell you, the first time I ever met anyone with PTSD, I was a chaplain intern at Presbyterian Hospital. I was about 23, 24 years old, naive. And the psychiatrist came by, come to know, and he said, I'd like you to meet this young man. He's returned from Vietnam and he's having some problems. I'd just like you to meet with him, talk with him. Well, I had a little third floor office with no windows, one desk, and two chairs. And on the outside of the east wall was a tar and gravel roof of the second floor. And about 2 minutes into the meeting with that young man, a workman started a jackhammer to repair the roof. You can imagine the sound of that. That young man instantly dove under the chair and put his hands on top of his head. He was back in Vietnam. He was back in Vietnam. That was my first experience of seeing one with PTSD. God bless him. And some of you may carry that as well. For us to look at post-traumatic stress disorder or ongoing stress disorder, I like to make a distinction between a specific trauma and what I'm going to call, for our purposes, I think is appropriate, ongoing stress disorder. You just know that it's the event that a person has experienced that was traumatic for them. They may have been injured, a buddy may have been blown up next to them, whatever the deal is, but they what's focused on with a soldier, whether it or a person who's been raped or whatever the experience they've had or some traumatic event, you focus on helping them to draw upon the resources they have and to address that issue in such a way that they can cope with it better. Doesn't ever disappear. It's not that, but to help them cope with it in a way that will be helpful. I think a number of veterans have a hard time with the 4th of July, not because of a lack of patriotism, but the sounds of fireworks going off. Can't you just imagine some people, I could tell you the number of people I've said, I just have to get way away from wherever I know there's going to be a fireworks display because just hearing the sounds of that takes me back there. Specific events trigger the emotion inside the person. It's like you're experiencing or you're reliving it right now. Now, to look at this, we could spend a lot of time on it, but that gives you, for our purposes, just a specific event. Then if you look at the ongoing aspect of PTSD, just imagine that a soldier has been on deployment for 9 months. 9 months. And in that 9-month period of time, that person has to be in a constant state of alert. Has to be aware. Is this an incoming fire? Is this outgoing fire? Is this a person on our side? Is this a person on the other side? The anxiety level has to be at a high alert so that just in case they need to react in such a way to deal with that situation, whatever it might be. I submit to you that we've all, to one degree or another, been in a constant state of alert for a couple of years. Haven't you? If you think about it, from early on, when you had disbelief that it really was occurring and we were in denial and we were told it was going to go away instantaneously and all that stuff, and then the reality that hits again and again and again. We think it's going to be over, and here comes something else. We're going to be able to do this, but then we can't do that anymore. You and I know that it's a constant change and alert, and to adjust and stay in a constant state of alert. And the result of that, as you were describing, even very briefly here, we've had all kinds of feelings. Almost every feeling that we have could be an elevated feeling because of this. And then all the thoughts that we have, don't you have to make a lot of decisions? Decisions. And you've had to make decisions today, just to keep safe and stay warm, thoughts and feelings. So this is our pandemic reality, and we are living in the midst of it. However, you and I know that people have been going through hard times forever, right? You've heard stories of parents and grandparents and past generations. You and I read history. We just know, you read in the Bible, people have been going through traumatic, horrible events forever. And so it's really nothing new. It may be different in different ways. Ours may be more invisible than some gone through war times or whatever in past years, but people have been going through hard times forever. Again, most people I see in therapy are going through a hard time, or maybe the hardest time in their life. Many of us appreciate and benefit from reading about people who've made it through hard times. It's inspiring to us, and we see how they've made it. And I'll just give one example. Viktor Frankl, Frankl. You probably know him. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Many people would say that was one of the greatest books of the last century. You may know he was a psychiatrist in Austria, Germany during the World War II time, the Holocaust time. He was in concentration camps, including Auschwitz. All of his family was killed, one way or another. All of his family died, except one sister who miraculously escaped to Australia. So here was Victor, living in these concentration camps, and being the psychiatrist that he was. One of the things he did was try to help other people. He would try to help people. I think that helped him to stay sane. He was doing helpful things if he could to other people. You know what their diet consisted of? A cup or a bowl of dirty water that sometimes had a fish head floating in it. Some people wouldn't drink it at all. Some people would drink it and throw it up, but it was just horrible. That was their nourishment. One day, as Frankl was looking into that cup of dirty water with a fish head floating in it, he peered into that dish and he looked into the eye of the fish. And he said, "There I saw beauty. There I saw beauty in an eye." I think it's those kinds of things that people dig down deep into, or whatever, of what helps us to stay safe, we might say, and helps us to stay sane. Because I said at other places, if they saw a crack someplace in the wall, they could look at it, maybe see the sun, maybe see a sunset. It's amazing what people do to make it through tough times. And you know why he was in the concentration camps? You know the reason. He was a Jew. He was born a Jew. Just like Jesus was born a Jew and Jesus was a Jew. That was his crime, because that's how he was born and that's who he was. Isn't it amazing how we carry that on with people who are different from us? And we carry it on in this country just as well as any place else, don't we? Sad but true. We do it. It's them. It is them. And how tragic that is. But what can we do to help other people in tough times? One of the people I was seeing in the earlier days of the pandemic had just become a widow. Her husband had died from Alzheimer's, and she had cared for him every day for 7 years, as he was, and many of you experienced that in your family or wherever else you might, but you can imagine what it was like for 7 years of caring for her husband until he died. And she was grieving, as you might well imagine. She was also depressed, and a friend of hers referred her to me and paid for her therapy. That's how this friend helped her. This woman was isolating. You used that word a little earlier. She was isolating out of her grief, and she wasn't even getting outside. She wasn't even walking out into her yard. And so one of the things that was important for her was to share her feelings, and she could say, "I even feel some relief," and she almost felt guilty for feeling relief of what, because she didn't have that for every day having to do what she'd been doing. But She felt some relief, but she was in depression and she was grieving. So I suggested she go out and walk. She began to walk out in her yard. If a person is depressed, we're down and we're in. We focus down and we focus in. And so a good thing when we're down is days like this to get up and out. It may even be cold, but it's still, Joe, I heard you say you're going to be getting out, walk a little bit. It's good. If you can, be safe, whatever these days are, but get up and get out. And so I love talking with this woman. She's a dear, dear woman. And she was saying how much she appreciated her friend paying for her therapy sessions. She had some money, but she said, I really appreciate that. That's probably the reason I really showed up for this. And then we began to talk about what she could do for someone else. And you have to remember when this was. Remember the toilet paper crisis? Remember that? Oh my gracious, people were going to the grocery stores and grabbing, you saw these pictures of people grabbing all this toilet paper, right? Well, it was during that time. And as you remember, possibly at that time, older people, whatever that meant, could go to grocery stores early and get their goods. Remember that? So she decided she was going to put her mask on, put her gloves on. She was going to go early to the grocery store and she would buy some toilet paper for some of her neighbors that she knew were homebound. So that's what she did. She went to the grocery store, mask, gloves, bought toilet paper, and as she called it, fancy water for her neighbors who were homebound. And she left that on the front porch or handed that to those people. And she said, it helps me to get up and out. It helps me by doing something that is helpful for someone else. And it was, I think, a bit of a turning point for her in how she was dealing with this. And you can imagine how much those people appreciated her. It is good. It's whenever we're going through tough times. And she said, I think I'm seeing God in what's going on here. That's a question that as people of faith, we often wonder about and think about, where's God in all of this? And she said, one of those people called me up and she said, you were like an angel when you brought toilet paper to me. I think she was doing something good. And many of you know that experience as well, that when we do something good for somebody else, it helps us. Well, many of you probably do good things and you're volunteers and you help in service and you help in your church. It helps us to look at what we can do. In tough times, whether you're in a concentration camp or whether we're in cold weather or whether we're in COVID times, it's good for us to keep looking at what we can do. There's always opportunity. And I think we can see opportunities that God gives us to do that. I'm going to say two more things and then we'll have some questions, hopefully. My latest book is called Life-Changing Stories. And it's really based on people I've seen in therapy or in my hospital work as well. When people are going through tough times, it's really stories about what people can do and what they do. And it's my privilege as a therapist many times to just journey with people as they go through these times and what they do. So I want to share with you one word, sane, S-A-N-E. Its origin is Latin, sanus, S-A-N-U-S, sanus. That means to be sane, means to be healthy both physically and spiritually. That's really what it means. We can add to that emotionally and relationally and spiritually or vocationally, but the word sane, I'd like you to just keep that word in mind as we go through whatever we go through in life. S-A-N-E. S can be for sleep, basic sleep. I call it the bedrock. As a therapist, I'm always interested. How's your sleep? How well we sleep helps us. You and I know for the multitude of reasons it benefits us, and it helps our mental well-being as well as our physical well-being, and I think our spiritual well-being as well. Other S word would be spiritual. Whatever that is for you, I'm always delighted at the varieties of religious experience that people have and what helps us spiritually. It may change over time. Some of you do devotionals, your prayer, your meditation, music, worship, being with other people. Whatever it is, I think we want to be sure that we tend to our spiritual life that helps us stay mentally well and take care of our mental health that helps us spiritually and every way as well. S. A is our attitude. Don't you know about attitude? Sometimes we have a good attitude, sometimes bad attitude. Is it good God, it's morning, or good morning, God? This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. I saw one of you, aren't we thankful that we have heat today? For some of us, that is a good thing who went through last February. SAN. It is for nutrition. Nutrition for our bodies, but also nutrition for our minds. What do we take into us that's good, that nourishes our well-being? Nutrition nourishes us. And E is being implied already as exercise. Well, that's getting up, out, and walking. I'll tell you, most everybody I see in therapy, I'll ask them, what kind of exercise do you do? Whatever that is for them. It may be that they walk around the block. It may be that they do other things to get out of doors and they take hikes or do weights or Pilates or yoga, whatever it is. But I hope you do exercise. And some of you do it out of doors. Some of you do it indoors, wherever you do it. But I hope you do exercise. If we do those 4 things, it helps us to be saner. You know, when I was a kid, it was baseball players. Okay, so Pee Wee Reese. In fact, this last book I wrote, I dedicated to 2 people I would consider my heroes. They were my mentors. That's how I dedicated it to them. One is a person named, these are 2 people you probably have never heard of. You know, it doesn't have to be the rich or the famous or whatever, but one is named Dave Erb. Dave was the chaplain at Presbyterian Hospital when I was there doing my internship from Perkins. And then through the years, I think about 7 years, I was there working as a chaplain and chaplain supervisor for CPE. And I loved that man. He was a Presbyterian minister. I learned so much from him. One of the things I'll never forget he said was, if God can call you to, God can call you from, and God can call you on to. And that's been a philosophy I've carried in my life always. The other is a person who is my psychology mentor, John Gladfelter, a brilliant, brilliant man. Used to teach at the medical school, but decided he didn't want to teach at the medical school anymore. And he was a mentor. And I learned so much from him. Those are 2 people I think of every day. I learned so much about people and how to hopefully work with people and counsel with people and help me in my faith. But those are 2 people that are not famous, but they are influence me every day in who I am and what I'm about. I have a term that is maybe not as delicate as the way you said it. I call it emotional constipation. Many times we have, I tell a story about it in this book. I think many times we hold things inside. You know, you're not supposed to say things. You're not supposed to get angry. You're not supposed to express feelings. One is just to be aware of them. That's one of the reasons I asked you a little bit earlier. What are some of the feelings you've had? What comes to your mind of what it's been like? To acknowledge things is helpful. Otherwise, it'll cause us problems physiologically, mentally, or emotionally, or relationships, maybe spiritually, one way or the other. So one is to be aware that I have feelings. It's okay to have feelings. Some of you are much more aware of it than others. And when you have them, it's a good thing to think about them if you need and release them if you would. And some people write these things out. Some people sing them out. Some people yell them out. I love your term, pity party, you know, and it's a good thing to have a time limit on it so we don't just stay there, I think you would be implying. But if we spend some time there, I think it's a good investment to be aware of it, feel it, express it, and then you can help. It helps us to move on rather than carrying it with us and carrying it with us. In fact, I buy, as a therapist, I buy Kleenex by the 6-pack. Does that make sense? A lot of people have shed their tears, and I think they feel safe to do it there. It's okay. I have another little term. It's like stored tears. Some of you, you feel it, you just swallow your tears, whatever, but it's a good thing for us to allow ourselves to just cry. I was doing a seminars recently, and I said, don't you think Jesus had a whole lot of feelings? I know my way of terming it was, Jesus said, I know you used 2 words in there to mention it about me. Jesus wept, shortest thing, right? I think Jesus cried a lot, and we know he did too. So I think it's a good thing for us to allow ourselves to cry. Some of you are more comfortable with it than others, but it's okay to cry, whatever the feeling is. So thank you, Janet. Yes, good for you. Good cry. I'm going to say they're feelings. Isn't it interesting that we label them bad? Isn't just to even use that term? They are real. They are feelings. You've heard this story about a little kid. who's scared to death at night. You have children, remember that? Little kid scared to death. No, there's a monster under the bed, right? There's a monster in the bed. He's scared. I'm just scared to death. And dad comes in and looks at, there's not any monster in the bed. You don't have any reason to be scared. You're not scared. You're not scared. There's no monster here. Dad leaves the little kid. I swear I was scared, so man said swear, but what I'm saying. So what do we call? Isn't it interesting how we label them as bad? You don't have to read too far in the Bible, much less psychology books, that anger is a very real feeling, right? Very, very real. Now, there's some people just go around sharing their anger on everybody all the time, and that is their primary feeling, and you and I live with it and see it and hear it, and you know what that's like. But we all have anger. And if you don't have a pulse probably, but I never get angry. I never get angry. What do you get then? I don't know. But if one way to think about this is that it's not the full definition, but sometimes it is said that a form of depression is anger held inside. So the person may not express the anger, but they store it inside, not unlike emotional constipation, I mentioned a little earlier, but we hold them. But it's okay I think it's good if we can identify feelings that we have. And it's more than 3 basic feelings. Many people you get sad, mad, and glad or whatever. But it's interesting to increase our vocabulary about feelings, that we all have a lot of feelings. And it doesn't mean you have to be obsessed with it, but we are feeling people. We come to this world as feeling people. And then we tell a little kid, no, you shouldn't feel that way. Well, I think that's repression of a child. And, tell me your feelings. When there's an invitation and the child learns to put words to it rather than hit or whatever else, it's a good thing. So if we can invite them and see feelings as our friends rather than our enemies, is probably a healthy thing for us. I'm, as a therapist, very well aware that our feelings can overwhelm us to the point that we cannot be functional. But if we can identify feelings, and a term I like to use is keep current. Just keep current about it. Keep current with your feelings, kind of what's the day been like and how have I felt today and anything I need to do about that or how I can feel better about that. It's the same thing might do with a couple who is in a relationship. It's good to keep current. It's good to keep current with your child. It's good to keep comfort current about all things in our lives. I would say it's good to keep comfort about our feelings so we don't store them and then they become that they control us rather than us being able to deal with them in probably healthy ways. Ministers need it, just like anybody else. Most ministers will say this is the hardest time they've ever had in their ministry, where they've been in a short while. If you think about a young minister or new minister going into a church in the COVID time, holy cow, it's been hard, right? Or for people who've been in it, and I know you use different terms, you have to pivot, you have to change, you have to do this, you can't do this. I sharing with the clergy retreat, use the term, I'll use it with you as well, that I called it verbal paranoia. Sometimes ministers are afraid, if I say this, these people won't like that. And if I say this, these people won't like that. They'll want to leave the church and take their money or whatever else. And I think all of this is a result of all of us living in that constant state of anxiety. And so things bother us more than at other times. So I would encourage you to appreciate your minister. It doesn't mean they're perfect. Joe, you may not be perfect yet, but going on to or something like that, right? But I think
From a distance anyway.
I've never had a minister say, I get too much encouragement from my congregation. I never receive enough. I received too many notes or texts that saying that they appreciated me. Now, whether they totally like my sermon or not is one thing, but ministers are people, as we very well know. So I think it's good if you can encourage them or support them, let them know you care about them, that you pray for them as well. Because many ministers give, like many of you may as well. And then they give and they give till they give out. So it's really nice to receive as well. So if you could appreciate, just let your minister know, I want you to know, I'm really for you. I pray for you. Anything I do to be supportive to you. It's being the person that is, we all minister to each other rather than just having the paid clergy or the senior pastor or whatever. I hope we see a priesthood of all believers, as Luther might have said it back when, that we're all in ministry. We all need each other, support each other. So I would encourage you to encourage your pastors. I'll tell you personally, I go to First Methodist in Richardson. Clayton Oliphant is our pastor. I'm not just saying this, that it's a great thing, but every Sunday afternoon for however long he's been there now, I just send him a text. I talk to him other time, just say how much I appreciate him or appreciate the sermon or what he said. I'll tell you, there's some ministers I've talked to who say, I have not received any feedback that's been positive from my congregation in months. That's sad. That's sad. So encourage them. We all need it. Thank you. I can speak to it. Easier said than done, isn't it? And I think that one of the things you heard I'll use that term again, emotional constipation. Many times we carry things that we don't need to carry, if I may say it that way. Many times we carry things that we lay upon ourselves and impress upon ourselves or press ourselves down with. And I will do an exercise with people in my office many times, or Zoom if it's that case. What's it like for you to carry that? How heavy is it? How long do you think you need to carry it? You can fill in the blanks of what these things are. What would you really, really like to do with it? Most people say, I don't want to have to carry it the rest of my life. And I say, that's really great. And sometimes people will imagine a Jesus figure or a God figure or whatever else, and can literally use their creative imagination. I say you can defy the laws of physics here and all the power that God gives us. And I want you to imagine, if they can imagine what it is and they got an image of it, whatever it is. It's fascinating what people will come up with. It may be a shape or size or form or weight. Now I want you to imagine giving that to, and the person can give it and then probably feel inside a much lighter feeling. And I encourage people to breathe it. Breathe, just breathe. Take a good deep breath. What's it like inside to have let go of that? And I'm giving you such a quick thumbnail sketch of what sometimes takes a number of minutes to do. But I think to know that is what we are asked to do. And come to me, all of you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I will give you peace. And so if we can think that we can let go of it and release it, we don't have to carry it forever. And that is a part of our faith of what we're about as well. So I think it may be harder to practice than we want to be able to pull it off, but I think it's a good thing to do. I'll tell you one other term I will use for many people is when we leave something. We all know that, you know how you say goodbye in Spanish? Adios, right? Adios. You know what it literally means? Dios is God. Dios is God. You bid it to God. You give it to God. Use that term, Stephen. Adios. To God we give it. Many times it'd be good for us to do a lot of adiosing. Anger is a common feeling. We could use anger derivatives like frustration and whatever else, but yes, most people carry it. Most people have it. And if you do, my term is no wonder. And so it's an understandable thing. And many times it's a hurt or wound or pain, and we may react in anger and frustration, but it's very common. Do I have time to give a concluding scripture?
This would be a good time for that.
One of my favorite passages of scripture, especially for any of us going through tough times, is Psalm 46. And in fact, I recommend that to a lot of people I see in therapy, Psalm 46. Now, this is a personal poem that I've written that is really a takeoff on Psalm 46, and hopefully it addresses all of us in ways that are helpful. God is always present, so we don't have to fear. No matter what happens, know that God is near. When our world seems to be falling apart and we're so frustrated or angry and don't know where to start, when overwhelmed by COVID, responsibilities, and stress, and when my whole life seems like such a mess, there's a deep river in our soul that flows with the life-giving water of shalom. God is in the midst of it all and is our ever-present helper even before we call. As our nation is in turmoil and politicians roar, God's voice says, love is the answer forevermore. The God who was with Jacob when he was scared to death is always as close to us as the Spirit's breath. even in the midst of all the stuff that is going on, look and see all the wonderful things God has done. Look and see all the wonderful things that people have done. So be quiet and calm, wear your mask, breathe, and be still, and know that God is for real. The same God who was with Jacob when he was scared to death is always as close to us as a spirit's breath. And all of God's children say, Amen.